The Ugly Truth. Once upon a time, there was a man who had a wife, 2 dogs, a small house, and a cherry tree. He was happy. He had everything he needed. Well, except for one thing. He didn't have truth. And when he realized that, he started to become sad. Because what is everything without truth? How could he be himself without truth? And his wife, who was a very wise woman, saw that the sadness of the man she loved would soon turn into her own sadness, and so she picked some of the cherries from the tree and baked some fresh bread and packed them in a little lunch and gave them to him and said, "Go, find your truth. I will be waiting for you here for when you return." And so the man went off into the world and started searching for truth. He searched for her in the great libraries and at the feet of the wisest scholars, but he didn't find her there. He searched for her in the most famous universities and amongst the most intelligent of all men, and he didn't find her there. And so he searched for her in the hallways of the houses of the common folk, and in fact in the gardens and the small villages and towns and in the countryside, and it seemed as though she had passed through there recently, but he still didn't find her there. And finally, with a heavy heart and about to give up, he was just about to go back home when he heard, "Psst, over here." And he heard a woman speaking his name. And just by hearing his name spoken in that way, he knew it was truth. Because her voice was clear, it was music. It was brighter than the shiniest diamond. That was truth. And he turned. No wonder he hadn't found her. You see, he actually had seen her before. In fact, he'd encountered her, he'd seen glimpses of her in every single place where he'd been. But he hadn't recognized her, because he hadn't been quiet enough to hear her speak and to recognize her voice, and just by looking at her, well, truth didn't look at all the way he was expecting. Truth was an old woman with gnarled fingers and a hunchback, and her skin was sallow and wrinkled, and her hair was just greasy, tangled strands, and her one tooth was yellow and black. But her voice was music. It was pure. And even though she was hideous and even smelled kind of bad, the man realized that this was what he had come for. And so he followed her, and she took him to a cave at the top of a mountain. And there they made a fire, and she started to teach him. And the more she spoke, the more amazed he became as he started realizing the depth and the wisdom and the purity of all the things she had to say, and he drank up every last one of her words, and he stayed with her for a year and a day, and he knew there was still so much more to learn. But after the year and a day, Truth looked up at him and said, "It's time." Now she was Truth, and so he knew, of course, that it was true. It was time for him to go back into the world to share what he had learned. He knew that he would never learn everything that she had to teach him. But she said, "Don't worry, you can always come back." "Thank you," he said. "Truly, you have surprised me. I almost didn't find you, and now my life is so much richer because of you. I will tell everyone about you, and I would love to give you a gift. What can I do for you, since you have done so much for me?" The old woman looked at him sadly with her clouded over eyes. She smiled with her wrinkled, saggy skin she lifted up one gnarled finger with a black, cracked fingernail. "Ah, yes," she said. "There is something you can do for me. When you tell others about me, tell them that I am young and beautiful."